All right, so welcome everyone. We are very happy to have Arya Mazumdar here. He's a professor at UCSD, and I know him now for many years, maybe since 2009 or so, when he was still a student doing his PhD with one of my Bell Labs colleagues, Sasha Bark at the University of Maryland. And since then, Arya has graduated, got a career award, got a number of best paper awards, I think had a couple of kids. Got married, right? And what is special about him is actually that he's one of the rare people who can very quickly get into another area, but really deeply, not just so that he can adopt some jargon or something like that. So I'm really looking forward to this talk. So without further ado, Arya, please start.
Thank you very much, Emina. Yes, I remember in 2009, I went to Bell Labs to attend Henry Landau's seminar. He used to have one in AT&T Labs, one in Bell Labs every week. I think Tuesday and Friday, something like that. So, and I met Emina in 2009 summer. That's really long time back. Yes. Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure. So I'm going to present something which is a topic that is pretty old, maybe hundreds of years old. It's all of what I'm going to present is joint work with my student Shomabrata Pal, who just graduated a couple of months ago and is doing a postdoc right now in Google. So I have borrowed quite a few slides from Shomabrata's thesis presentation, and in its entirety, the talk is based on his thesis. Right, so I'm going to talk about mixture models and mixture of models. So mixture models is somewhat a very old topic, and mixture of models is relatively new. Let me explain what they mean. So in general, we are going to talk about data heterogeneity. So recently we have seen unprecedented success in prediction from data in all across the board. I have just put a few nice looking pictures over here, but we have had very good results in forecasting in weather, in stock market, in physics and astronomy, thanks to fitting very big models to data. Right? However, it is not always clear whether we should just fit one model to the data. And the reason is the data in any one of these applications is very heterogeneous. They are not following one particular distribution. They might not be coming to the same source. And even if one happens, the other doesn't happen. Right? And I'm going to tell you two particular applications that we had in mind. One is recommendation system or recommender systems. So where we have a lot of people, a population, and we want to recommend them movies. We want to match them with restaurants. And we know that everyone right now usually try to fit a deep learning model for this recommendation task. However, people are different, their tests are different, and if you just remove the, so just for the sake of fairness, maybe you cannot take all the metadata in account. And in that case, if you're trying to fit one model to a very big population, that might sometimes be very expensive or can even fail. And one other application where data heterogeneity is pretty crucial is federated learning, which is a buzzword peddled by Google quite a bit. But here it's really a distributed learning system where you have many worker machines or servers spread across a network, and there is a central server that sort of oversees all this network, and you jointly learn, because your data is distributed, you jointly learn a machine learning model in this network. So that's what is called federated learning. And here also, because your data is distributed, they can be of variety of types. They can be some data from your mobile phones, some data from your laptop computer, and they're very heterogeneous. So it is not clear whether it is always a good idea to learn one model. So how do we traditionally deal with data heterogeneity? By the way, at any point of this talk, just feel free to stop me. I think that works better than to keep your questions for that. Just yeah, I'm going to speak quite informally and going to give a broad overview of this topic. So feel free to stop me anytime. Right. So in unsupervised learning, there is a canonical way to handle data heterogeneity. So suppose you have the distribution of human height, which looks something like this. I just picked
I have
it
a
up.
question. What are you measuring height in?
Inches, I think.
Inches? Okay.
Oh,
I was like centimeters seems a bit small.
Right. This is from my kindergarten class, I guess. No, this is inches, right? And you see that our tendency is to fit something like a Gaussian distribution or a normal distribution to any kind of this type of measures. And here it is a little bit skewed. And actually, this goes back almost 130 years to the time of Pearson's, when he said basically maybe there are not one Gaussian distribution, maybe there are two Gaussian distribution, because the male height, if the data is unlabeled between male and female, then there can be maybe two Gaussian distribution hidden over here, and that's why you see somewhat of this skewness, or it's not completely symmetric. Okay, so this mixture, as I said, goes pretty long back, from the time of Pearson, and it's the main task is, given the data points, you have these samples and you want to figure out the parameters of the two or more Gaussians. This can be in high dimension as well. For example, I have a two-dimensional Gaussian plotted over here, and if I just look at the scatter plot, the data set is going to look something like this. I don't know if you can see my cursor over here. So,
yes.
my cursor, yeah, okay, great. So given these points, these data points, I want to figure out the parameters. So this is like a parametric parameter estimation problem. You want to figure out the parameters of the two Gaussians. Okay. So the results in mixture model, since there are results for last 100 years, obviously things have exponentially exploded in the last few years. But there are numerous results. This is a classical field. The results can come under two different type of flavors. One is parameter estimation, one is density estimation. Parameter estimation is what I just told you. You want to find out the mean and the variances of the individual Gaussians, means and the covariances of the individual Gaussians exactly, up to some error perhaps. In the case of density estimation, you want to try to fit a probability distribution in your data. And there can also be these two things, proper learning and improper learning. In proper learning, you want to fit a distribution from a class of distribution. In improper learning, you just want to fit any distribution. Okay. And there are, again, numerous results. I have just put a random sample from the past 30 years or so. Okay, right. So, and this Gaussian mixture things seem to be pretty powerful, because if you see all these pictures, all of this can be written as mixture, can be described as mixture of a very small number of Gaussians, right? See something like which are asymmetric, which is something like this unimodal, very sharp peak, or maybe you can have this claw density, comb density. All of this can be modeled as Gaussian mixtures. And actually, I have one slide that basically for each one of them, all 15 of them, I have I have this at most, I think 5 components is the largest number that I have. Okay, and that's expected because this Gaussian kernel that's known to be a very good approximator. There is this radial basis kernel, which is a universal approximator. There are some results about that. You can, with a small number of Gaussians, you can probably fit any type of data, any type of, well, given some nice data has some nice properties. Okay. So these mixtures are sort of like omnipresent in statistics, and sometimes they can come from unexpected sources as well. So for example, let us consider this problem, which is more of an information theoretic problem and motivated by DNA sequence reconstruction. So you want to reconstruct a binary sequence from its random subsequences. So what you do is you take a binary string over here, you send it through a deletion channel, and each bit is deleted independently with probability, say, half. And you get these traces, right? And you send it again and again. And every time you get one trace, right? So, and then the question is, how many such traces you need to reconstruct this binary string? So this is called the trace reconstruction problem. Turns out that this problem, which doesn't have anything to do with mixture apparently, it is actually a parameter recovery problem in mixtures. So how many traces are necessary and sufficient to recover X? You can actually map it to a parameter recovery problem in binomial mixtures. Okay, so if I have time later at the end of the talk, I'm going to show you this mapping. How can we map this problem to a mixture problem? So, so mixtures are universal, like everywhere, and there are some problems that are where mixtures are like they're apparently not there, but they are hidden. Now there is a relatively new paradigm, which is in the context. All of this are in the context of unsupervised learning. You want to do parameter learning, so there is no machine learning, so to speak. So in the context of supervised learning as well, there can be mixtures, and it is mixtures of functional relationship. So for example, this plot appeared in this paper by Cohen in 1980, which is a plot of music perception. So I think in the x-axis over here, a tone is like a frequency, a tone is being played, and then in the y-axis, people are asked to identify the tone. So, and so this is proportional. So for example, you played a tune which is, so 2 means it's proportional to some frequency. 2.5 means is the proportion of that frequency. And then whether you are identifying, whatever you are identifying, that is in the y-axis. So it has, this experiment was done within a population, and then this is the scatter plot. You can see how people have identified the tunes that have been played. And you see that there is actually one line over here. So this is, there are not, if you try to fit one model over here in this data set, that's going to be too complicated, okay, because things are, you know, very zigzaggy. But 2 lines sort of explains it pretty well. And this also, this is a little funny, because for some people, apparently, whatever you play, they're just going to identify it over here. So they're sort of tone deaf. And there are some people who can identify it clearly, correctly. So you have this line over here. So, and then in these papers, they mentioned this is sort of a mixture of linear regression, because you had, so it's a mixture of functional relationships. So you have feature and levels, but the mapping from feature to level, which is the usual thing in supervised learning, that's not done by one function, but it is done by a mixture of functions. And I'm going to formalize this later. And there are other plots that you can see. So this is some prices of fish import. Did I just lose something?
Yeah, we don't see the.
Okay, hold on one. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, great. Sorry about that. So you see, this is the prices of fish, and this is the quantity in tons, and these are the dots are actually imports to different countries. And you see there are from a third country. So all of these are being imported into the European Union countries from a third country. And there is clearly 2 lines over here. There is this solid dotted lines. These are flows to the member state 7. I don't know which state that is. And these are the other EU countries. So you see just by looking at this, it's not like one line explains the mapping to quantity to values. It's actually 2 lines, right? So for different nations, the prices are different. Therefore, there are 2 models over here. Okay. Now, so this is mixture of linear regression. Similarly, you can also have I think we lost it again, right?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on. Okay. Okay, so this is mixture of linear regression, but you can also have mixture of classifiers, right? So where your levels are really categorical values plus or minus ones, for example, and say they are red dots versus blue dots, and you have this red dots and blue dots over here. If you try to fit a hyperplane through this data to separate out red dots from the blue dots, it's very difficult to do. However, if you try to fit two hyperplanes over here to separate out the red dots from the blue dots, that works pretty well. So there is almost no prior work in mixture of classifiers except for some work by Montanari and his students, and Anand Kumar and our students, yes, from 2015, 2016. Okay, so we have a mixture of functional relationships, and that can be mixture of linear regressions, mixture of classifiers, right? And let's now formalize this. So we have, so we are going to formalize all sort of mixture of functional relationships over here. So suppose we have some parametric family over here. For example, the parametric family can be a Gaussian distribution with the means being the parameter. And now suppose we have unknown parameters. So you can think these are the unknown component means. Now we can have a generative model where one of the components are chosen randomly and uniformly. And then my sample is generated according to that, that distribution with the chosen parameter, right? So if you have chosen say second theta2, then you are just going to see in this example a Gaussian distribution with mean theta2, right? And you every time you generate a sample, so this is the standard mixture models. So this is for unsupervised learning. For supervised learning, you can have mixture of linear regression, where you can similarly have unknown parameters, theta1, theta2, theta L. These are the parameters that you want to, and this can all be high dimensional. These are the parameters you want to recover. How do you generate samples from mixture of linear regression? So you can uniformly choose a theta from 1 to L, and then given whatever you have chosen, you can get to see a level which has mean x x times theta transpose, the inner product of x and theta. So this is like a linear model. So you can think of this as a linear model plus Gaussian noise with variance sigma square, right? So you may not have this noise, then this is just going to be x times theta t. So you can also have mixture of linear classifiers, and you can write the noisy version, which will be like a soft max, but here I have written a no noise version. So again, you choose a t uniformly between 1 to L. So you have chosen a theta. And then the level y given x and t is +1 if the inner product, if x is one side of the hyperplane, theta t, whose normal is theta t, and it is -1 otherwise. Right? So you now have these tuples of xy, feature and levels, and this is the model with which they are being generated. Okay, is this clear?
Just a question. Here, the x is not random?
Yes, I'm coming to this. Okay, so that's exactly the next slide. So what about the covariates or the features? So there are two models that people usually consider. One is x is random. It can be a Gaussian random variable. For example, it can be a spherical Gaussian with identity covariance matrix. There is one other model which is relatively recent. It is experimental design. It says you can have some control over x. You can design the covariates and ask for levels. And this is in particular useful in the case of recommendation engines or in the applications where you have crowdsourcing or human in the loop, because you can ask someone whether they like this movie or not, or whether they or you can see how they rated some restaurant or not, and you can actually design your movies or restaurant for which you're asking for ratings.
So but is this different than like the standard fixed design versus random design, like in like normal statistics, like or like there's something different about it, or is it just similar but more adaptive or something?
So the experimental design, the Gaussian design is the standard statistics.
Random design.
Yeah, random design. The experimental design here, you can make it adaptive. So this is actually a new model.
So it's not fixed design. It's not the same as fixed design. It's more like group testing in the adaptive setting or something.
Right, exactly. Yes.
Sorry, I have a question too. So, yes. For example, when you gave the examples on slides 11 and 12, so, but by just looking at the picture, like the first solution that I can remember, it would be, for example, using kernel methods, which is using maybe a higher dimensional for the features, and the problem would be solved. So why I would go with mixtures? So for example, usually we can like create a third feature that this combination.
Right. So yes. So suppose you do not have like, okay, so like the human heights, if I tell you like what is the other feature that's like male versus female, like if I just told you that this population is the male population, you can just take that as a feature, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So here we are assuming that latent variable is actually hidden from us. So if we could, so there is this clustering issue over here that is hidden. If we could, and if we want to include that, that's sort of like a categorical thing, right? So if you want to include that as a feature, it's not going to be a linear model anymore. I mean, the dependence on that feature is very crucial, and it's sort of abrupt, right?
Okay, so you're saying like maybe I want to keep this complexity to be linear, and by this way, like maybe better to go with modeling it as a mixture of distribution.
Right. So if I model, I will show you that. So you don't have to do a whole lot of like if you try to envision this as a mix, instead of trying to fit a single model, if you want to envision this as a mixture of two things, then you can use some techniques from unsupervised learning to actually deal with this in a much more explainable and nice way.
I see. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Right. So Gaussian design, X is just Gaussian, or it can be some other random vector. Experimental design, I have control over how do I want to choose X, and I'm going to talk about the experimental design thing quite a bit because it's a new thing. So I will explain how things are going to work. Okay. So now when we are talking about supervised learning, there are two important considerations that we will be looking at, or may not be looking at in this talk, but that's worth considering. So one is the prediction error, right? So suppose you learn these two lines. So can there be a learning theory for mixtures? Right? If there is for example, you can suppose this is the data set you are given. You can write down an empirical risk function, and you can solve that to fit two models. But then how are you going to do any prediction from this? Right? So is there even can you make this question well defined? Because since you have two models, at the time of prediction, you're going to give me two answers. Is that still okay? So we can argue that is okay, because in some applications, it is fine to output a list of prediction. For example, suggestions of movies, and that's why I was bringing in this application of recommendation system. So that's one thing. The other thing is the non-realizable case, when we do not have a generative model, but we are just given a data set like this. So in this type of data set, we can define a loss function to fit two lines, but it turns out that those loss functions are often non-convex, and this is sort of a very simple loss landscape for these two lines. And then there is a lot of algorithmic aspects that we are not going to discuss in this talk, like how do you how do you actually do the empirical risk minimization in this type of problems. Okay, so now let us take a look at how in unsupervised learning mixture models are dealt with. So one solution is, if the parameters are somewhat separated, one solution is to do a clustering. And that line of work started by Sanjay Dasgupta from 1994, and he basically showed that, so in the case of high dimensional Gaussian mixture, if the separation between the means of the components is order of square root of dimension, then you will be able to learn the parameters, okay, by doing clustering. And the idea is to just project this high dimensional problem to a smaller dimensional problem. Like over here, I took this picture and then I have projected in one dimension, and I can see there are like 3 or 4 Gaussians, and in one dimension I can try to do a threshold based demixing, okay, and then estimate the parameters. Okay, so later this has been improved by Dasgupta and Schulman in one paper, and Arora and Kamnan in another paper, to dimension to the power of 1/4. So there is also a parallel approach, which is a spectral approach. So you look at the covariance matrix of the data set that you have, and you do an eigenanalysis to find the principal components, and sort of you say those are the directions of the Gaussians. So this is the general techniques when the parameters are separated. But in many cases, the parameters might not be separated, as in the very first example we have seen, this male and female heights. You don't clearly see 2 peaks. There is still 1 peak. And in those case of those type of problems, you do not have the required separation, and therefore this clustering or the spectral methods, they are going to fail. So as a matter of fact, the first method that Pearson used in 1894 for one-dimensional mixtures, so this famous Pearson's crab problem, where I think Pearson, well, I'm just trying to think who went to the so this, I'm not sure whether Pearson went to vacation in Naples or one of his friends went to vacation in Naples, and they collected this Naples crab and then measured 23 different properties of the Naples crab. One of them was the gap between, the 2 claws that the crabs have, and that follows this distribution, the blue distribution. That's the empirical distribution. So you can fit this green curve over here, and it's so all other properties, or most of the other properties can be fit using a Gaussian distribution or a normal curve. However, this one is somewhat asymmetric. So Pearson's conjecture was that there is not one species of Naples crab, but there are actually 2 species, and you can fit a mixture of 2 Gaussians over there. And to do this, he used something called method of moments, which we teach, I don't know, like in the basic statistics course. So you and he explained, like, method of moments, you express moments as functions of the parameters and then estimate the moments by some plugin estimator, and then you solve. I am not sure why I'm using this. Okay, I think it is back again. Okay, so, and Pearson basically showed that you need 6 moments for fitting you can go up to 6 empirical moments to fit this crab data and estimate the parameters of the 2 component Gaussians. So this method of moments are good when you do not have separation between the means. And like I think 125 years later, Kalai, Moitra, Valiant, and Hard and Price, they showed that 6 moments suffice for Gaussian mixtures, general Gaussian mixtures with 2 components. Moitra and Valiant in the same paper from 2010 showed that 4K minus 2 moments suffice for Gaussian mixture models with K components. And Belkin and Sinha they showed that polynomial number of moments suffices for many other mixture families whose characteristic function follows some properties. Okay, so method of moments usually work for one dimension because you have to estimate the moments. Moments are not well defined for higher dimension. So for higher dimensions, you have something called tensor. So this is the method of moments in high dimension. So here you take expectation of outer products of samples, right? And mixture with small number of components will imply that you will have tensors with low rank. So then tensor decompositions were a staple for learning high dimensional mixtures, and there are a few references over here that studied it pretty extensively. And this tensor decomposition method with the Gaussian design, where X is Gaussian, was also studied in the context of with tensor methods in all these papers. Okay. Any questions? So what I said is there are two methods for unsupervised learning of mixture. One is clustering or spectral method, where when the means are separated, where the parameters are separated. And the other one is method of moments or the method of tensors. And that's useful when the means are, there is no separation. So there is yet another method for this. And this is the statistical distance method. So the statistical distance method is relatively new. Again, I think it started from this paper by Belkin and Sinha. So it says, but then it was not well developed. It is still developing, as a matter of fact. So you can think of any parameterized family of mixtures as, you know, this as some points in some metric space, and you can actually define some statistical distance, maybe the total variation distance between candidate mixtures. Then if you can show that any two candidate mixtures are at least some total variation distance apart, then you will be able to identify them with enough number of samples. I mean, I'm not talking about the computational aspects here, but suppose by just using a minimum distance estimator, you can actually identify. So that is the statistical distance method. Okay, so candidate mixtures are points in some metric space. You define an appropriate distance and show that any two candidate mixtures are at least some total variation distance apart. So we actually studied this quite a bit, and we were able to show that for a very large family of mixtures, actually this statistical distance method works and gives results that were missing earlier in the literature. So because these mixtures were not even studied. So for example, mixture of Gaussians. However, the statistical distance methods, they sort of require your parameters to be somewhat discretized, because otherwise you will not be able to recover anything with certain precision. Okay, I'm not going to go into the detail of it, but for certain cases that is expected, for example, in the case of binomial distribution, binomial has two parameters, n and p, and n is already discretized. So this can only be integers. So for mixture of binomials, which actually is motivated by this trace reconstruction problem that I mentioned earlier. So there you can have this type of sample complexity result. Okay. All right. So the most practical or the popular algorithm for demixing mixture is some sort of alternating minimization, or the EM algorithm. Right, and you probably all have seen versions of this EM algorithm. So you define some objective function involving latent variables and parameters. So in the first step, you estimate the latent variables given parameters. Then you estimate the parameters given latent variables, and you iterate to minimize the objective. So for example, k-means clustering algorithms. This is very practical and widely used. So there is recent algorithmic interest to use k-means clustering or EM algorithm for Gaussian mixture by these papers by Chaudhary, Dasgupta, and Bhattacharya local UCSD people. There is also this paper by Daskalakis, Samos, and Zempetakis, and so on. EM algorithms are also used for mixture of linear regression with Gaussian design by Ian Karmanis and Sanghavi, and then very recently by Lee and Liang. Okay, so now that we have these tools, EM algorithm, method of moments, statistical distance method, and the clustering based, like the separation based methods, we are going to go to mixture of linear regressions and see what can we do. So just to reiterate, so you have unknown hyperplanes, theta 1, theta 2 up to theta L, right? So your model is, the y is generated by taking x inner product with theta I, then adding some Gaussian noise. Now, so far we have been so the Gaussian, I mentioned that Gaussian design has been studied in at least a couple of different papers, both with the tensor method and the EM methods. Let's look at the query-based model, which is proposed by In, Pedasani, Chen, and Ramachandran in 2019. So this is a pretty recent thing. And they looked at it as a generalization of the compressed sensing problem. So here you can actually design X. Okay, so you can design linear queries X. This is under your control. And the question that you are asking is very much like a compressed sensing question. You want to recover all the hyperplanes with minimum number of queries. And you can adaptively design this X's. Okay, any question? Anand, is the model sounds good now?
Yeah, totally great. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, and then the question that we want to ask here is, what is the sample complexity, or what is the number of queries you need to solve this problem? So you design this X1 up to Xn.
So you know the number of the number of hyperplanes, right?
You know the number of hyperplanes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So what I'm going to do is now to give one algorithm for this this problem. Okay. So the first step in this algorithm, I'm going to repeat the queries and cluster. So as if I'm going to use the same access. So in practice, many times it is difficult to give the same access to rate people, but I can find similar access to rate. For example, I can ask people to rate Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers, and Return of the King. These are basically just the three parts of the same movie, so to speak, and I can see what they are rating. So as if I'm just asking them to rate the same movie again and again, right? So once I do that, then what I will do is I have so from the responses, I'm just going to get this Gaussian distribution with mean x times theta 1 with and variance sigma square. And for the same query, I might, whenever the model theta 2 is being used, I'm going to get this. So basically, my levels are following a Gaussian mixture, right? So whatever are the prior discussed methods that we gave for Gaussian mixture, we can actually use any of them to recover, to denoise, or to recover the exact inner products, right? X theta 1, x theta 2, x theta L. And so this is my step 1. Step 2 over here is alignment across queries. So let me explain what that means. Okay. I'm sorry, this animation is completely bonkers. Oh. Okay, let me just stop over here. Okay, so I'm basically looking at all the results from the query x1, right? And I can have some samples that are x1 times theta 1. I can have some samples x1 times theta 2. I can have samples x1 times theta 3, right? And I could, by just using Gaussian demixing, know these exact values. And similarly, I will know the same things for x2, right? But And these are, you can think of this as ratings for two different movies by different people, right? But now I want to club the responses of one model. So I want to take x1 times theta 1 and x2 times theta 1 and club them together, because then I will be able to solve a linear system. But since I don't know who is rating what, I cannot really club these models together, right? So there is this asynchronicity, or there is this mismatch, right? So we don't know how to club the responses of one model, right? So there is no alignment, so to speak, and that's going to be a big problem, right? So here is one technique that you can use for alignment, that is by using redundant query. So what does redundant queries mean? So suppose you query with x1 theta x1 and x2, and you have done multiple queries. So sometimes you get x1 theta 1, sometimes you get x1 theta 2, and so on. So now you can query with two additional vectors. What that means is you can design these queries x1 plus x2 and x1 minus x2, and you can again repeat querying with them, right? So now what you have formulated over here is some sort of an error correcting codes, because now you can do like identify if there is some mismatch. So suppose you have clubbed x1 theta 1 with x2 theta 2, whereas you should have clubbed x2 theta 1, right? So suppose you have wrongly identified this, but that will mean that if I just take the sum in the left column and the difference in the right, and then match with these two values over here that we have gotten, and if it doesn't match, then we can just swap, right? So we can do this type of thing. The main problem is that I'm just designing this additional queries, which is a sum and difference. In practical problems, when I'm trying to apply this to recommendation systems, I then have to have a movie that is basically whose features are sum of the features of two other movies and the difference of the features of two other movies, and that's probably not practical. So we have to come up with some ad hoc methods. But for analysis, we can actually do something like this. I mean,
just trying to understand here the model. So for you, you have the X is the movie or some genre of movies, and the theta is the user?
Yeah, X is the movie. X is the movie. So X1 is one movie. And I'm thinking, suppose people have two different models in their mind, right? So, okay, so I can, suppose I'm theta 1 and you are theta 2.
Okay.
So I'm going to rate it with respect to theta 1, whatever my rating is, and you are going to do it with theta 2.
So it's like you're learning two styles for users, theta 1 and theta 2.
Right.
Based on how they rate the movies.
Right. So suppose all the Netflix users, I can divide them into two models, theta 1 and theta 2.
Okay.
But when I'm asking them to rate a movie, I don't really know I'm getting a rating from theta 1 or theta 2. Because if I knew that, then the problem would be simpler.
Exactly. Okay, I got it.
Yeah. And that's why I need to do this alignment. Okay. Okay. So in the last step, once I have clubbed this thing, I can just recover this by solving a set of noisy linear equations. And if I just plug everything in, it turns out that to recover each unknown vectors with some precision, I'm sorry, this keeps happening. Okay. So for example, if sigma was the noise, and if I want to learn every unknown vector within L2 norm of sigma or order of sigma, we need only order of d divided by square root of SNR, that number of samples. And then there are some other results that we can do, but the drawback here is that it's not clear. Like theoretically, this is all fine, but when you are designing an algorithm for a practical system, it's not clear what is a sum movie and what is a difference movie, right? So it's not really that practical. However, you can actually, by doing some more tricks, you can make this somewhat practical, but those tricks are sort of ad hoc. Right, so we had like some other setting where, so this is the experimental design setting. We have used tensor methods for the Gaussian design setting, and that's a pretty recent paper with Somobroto. So there are a few other papers. So these are, I have just collected all these references over here. Let's just move over. So now let me get back to the non-realizable setting and the prediction error. So one question is, suppose I do not have the generative model, will the EM algorithm or that type of thing still work? Right? So when I have just been given the data set. So here you can formulate an optimization objective or an empirical risk function. Right? So how can you do that? You can define something called the mean loss, right? So you have this data and level, so xi, yi. So suppose you want to fit two models, so theta1 and theta2. So you will compute the loss with respect to theta1 and with respect to theta2, and then you will take the minimum of those two losses. Exactly like in k-means clustering, you map it to the nearest center. Then you have this loss function, which is a function of theta1 and theta2, but this has this type of minimum. There are some latent variables EIs which are hidden over here. And then you minimizing this empirical risk function. Obviously, this is non-convex, and it's hard to solve this type of problem. But you can show that actually, and this is like a very recent work, we are still writing it down, that EM type algorithm, because we do not have a generative model here, or k-means clustering type algorithms are actually going to work over here and give certain type of approximation guarantee. So if your initialization is good, then actually even in this non-realizable setting, we'll be able to figure out, you'll be able to minimize this loss function with whatever approximation guarantee you want to give. Right. So yes, and that's basically all I had to say for the main talk. Now, in the remaining couple of minutes, I want to go to the trace reconstruction problem and show you how this deletion channel problem that I mentioned earlier can be reduced to a mixture problem. So for the main talk, this is all I had. Now I'm just going to go to appendix, but for this, let us hold our questions for a moment when I go through this trace reconstruction problem. So recall in the trace reconstruction problem, you have a binary sequence that's going through a deletion channel. So each bit is being deleted with probability half or probability p, say, right? So suppose X is your sequence, which is given by this 1 1 1 0 1 0 0. And then suppose I'm counting these things, Ri's, which are the statistics. This is the number of ones before the ith zero in X. So R1, for example, is the number of ones before the first zero, which is over here. So R1 is 3, R2 is 4, and R3 is also 4, right? So now R1, R2, and R3, they uniquely define X. So if I just give you the number of ones before the ith zero in X, then I know how many, then I can uniquely reconstruct the vector, the binary vector X. So now in the trace reconstruction problem, I have been given these random traces. So I can just pick a random zero in one of the traces. So the number of ones before it is actually a mixture of binomial with parameters Ri and 1 minus p, where 1 minus p is the retention probability. Why? Because the zero that I have picked up, this could have been the first zero, right? In that case, the number of ones before it is going to be, since each bit is being deleted independently, number of ones going before it is just going to be R1, is going to follow a binomial distribution, R1 with parameters R1 and 1 minus p. Then if it were the second zero that I have randomly picked up, so then the number of ones before it is going to be binomial R2 1 minus p, and so on. So if I just pick a random 0 in one of the traces and then just count the number of ones before it, it will turn out that this is actually a binomial mixture. So whatever is the sample complexity of learning binomial mixture, parameter learning in binomial mixture, that's going to be sufficient for the trace reconstruction problem. So that's it. That's how actually we can, some problems where them being mixtures are not apparent, we can actually reduce those problems to a mixture learning, parameter learning problem in mixtures. Okay, that's it. So now I'll just go back, and if you have any question, let me know.